This video is sponsored by LG. I spent over 400 hours, used 3 different platforms, broke a controller playing Spider-Man. As I get ready for Spider-Man 2, it seemed like a perfect time to test some of my favorite technologies. I am a TV nerd. I've done videos on OLED and QD-OLED and kind of every other TV tech out there. But for the first time ever, we have extra high refresh rates on OLED monitors, ultra wide, crazy resolutions. So full disclosure, LG did provide us with the UltraGear monitor. So this is a compensated video, but to LG's credit, they did let us compare the monitor to the best that we could find. And that's why we brought the Samsung in for this video. So this video is the ultimate comparison of new technology versus tried and true as we put them together and see which one is ultimately going to come out on top. And in a lot of instances, newer doesn't always mean better. So you might be thinking to yourself, John, this topic sounds familiar. I have made a QD-OLED versus WOLED video comparing TVs. When it comes to monitors, the tech might be the same, but how it's used in packages can make things differ like vastly. All right, so I want to break down the features of these specific monitors using for this video, but just know it's the majority of what we're discussing today will kind of be pros and cons of each panel technology. So with that, let's go over the basic differences between what QD-OLED and WOLED actually are for those you might not know. So both panels are OLED at their core. It stands for organic light emitting diode. This means QD-OLED and WOLED both lack a backlit panel. The individual diodes, kind of pixels, are their own light source, which means that those individual diodes can also turn off. That's how you get those like really perfect blacks, because they're just turned off. But that lack of a backlit panel that you see in LED TVs and LED monitors and QLED technology, that means that OLED panels just don't get as bright as something like mini LED can. WOLED technology came along a few years ago as a way to kind of close the gap in brightness between traditional OLED and then much brighter panels on the market. In case you're asking yourself, John, what does that W stand for? It just stands for white. These panels add a dedicated diode that only outputs white light. QD-OLED is a new kid on the block. That still is using the standard RGB diode to create white light, but that quantum dot layer over it, the QD part of the OLED, is what gives QD-OLED its signature vibrancy with really bright colors. But even though both of these monitors won't be as bright as a mini LED display, I found they are plenty bright for anything that I have ever used them for, whether it was editing, daily use like emails, or gaming. There are, however, things to look out for with these monitors. One definitely more than the other, in my opinion, but I'll go over that in a moment. But first, let's talk about what I love about each. All right, so the first thing you're going to notice about these monitors is their shape. They're big. They are ultra wide and very curved. And when I say ultra wide, I think probably ultra wide would like describe them better. So the LG UltraGear 45-inch WOLED QHD monitor has a 21:9 aspect ratio. So it happens to be the very first OLED monitor ever to have a 240 Hertz refresh rate with 0.03 millisecond GTG response time. That is nuts to actually see on a monitor like this. Like the previous gaming monitors in the UltraGear line, LG sticking with their matte finish on their panel, which personally I liked because where my desk is, there's a lot of light coming in, so it helped with glare and reflections. So I know a lot of people on the internet in general have very strong feelings about matte versus glossy. But if you're worried about that, I don't think it's much of a concern here. When I was actually gaming on it, I didn't notice it at all. The colors didn't seem to be refracted or too soft. It actually looked extremely crisp and colorful thanks to that OLED tech behind it. So part of that I think was due to the curve of the screen. So this is something I don't know if a video is gonna do this justice to like show the scope and size of this thing, but it has an 800 curvature rating, which I didn't know what that meant. I started doing research. But the lower the number, the more the screen is curved. So if I sat close enough to the screen, my peripheral view was almost fully taken up by this display. So playing my favorite game, I think probably forever, Spider-Man right now, was absolutely incredible. And I have played way more hours than I've ever admit to my wife on a big 83-inch OLED and a small screen on the Steam Deck, and neither of those got me anywhere close to the sense of immersion like the LG UltraGear monitor did. I mean, it was unbelievable. And playing racing games like Forza, you can see things happening to your side. You can see cars passing you, or in my case, me passing cars. It was a very unique experience. So the Samsung G9 49-inch QD-OLED monitor also sports 240 Hz refresh rate with a 0.03 millisecond response time. This one has an insane 32:9 aspect ratio with an 1800 curvature rating, so it's less curved than the LG, but a way wider aspect ratio means the pixel density is also a bit lower than LG's 21:9 monitor. So it's hard to notice, but if you're looking for it, I think you can definitely see it. So Samsung's QD-OLED tech does provide, predictably, really vibrant pictures and bright colors regardless of whether you find a game that supports 32:9 or not. Your gaming experience is going to be immersive and beautiful, and then it's partially due to the glossy finish on the Odyssey G9. Either one you get, you're gonna get a really incredible gaming experience with OLED and high refresh rates available. You're going to have sort of a somewhat future-proof monitor solution for I think a really long time. But that does not mean they're perfect. There are a few potential downsides to each I think you should think about when deciding between a WOLED panel and a QD-OLED panel. So let's turn that glass upside down, talk about the cons. So both of these two different monitors and OLED panels, I think share a lot of the same pros. Both have really awesome build quality. Both have a pretty solid amount of I/O on the back. Price is definitely at a premium level and around the same, but there are cheaper options available on the WOLED side. All that's fine. When it comes to cons, start to see, I think, some separation between these two monitors. And I think where you see the biggest difference between the two is when you're in a reasonably lit room or a brightly lit room. When you look at them side by side, WOLED will keep its black color. On the QD-OLED, the blacks will look a bit more like magenta. You're not seeing that black color shift on the QD-OLED in a dark room, but if you game or just sort of use this monitor in a room with a decent amount of light, you're going to see that shift in black colors on the QD-OLED, whereas the LG maintains its color and brightness in either scenario. And this isn't just an issue that's unique to like this specific Samsung monitor or any QD-OLED monitors, by the way. TVs have this issue too, so it's everything QD-OLED. Now whether that issue is resolved in maybe future QD-OLED updates, obviously I don't know that yet, but at least right now it's an issue, whereas WOLED does not have that problem. And by no means construe this as thinking, or I think, that QD-OLED is not a really good technology. It is an incredible technology, but this is definitely one con of technology as it exists right now. Something else to consider between these two types of OLED is how hot each one's get. Now you can see side-by-side temperature of each. The LG WOLED on the left averaged around the mid-80s in temperature, but the Samsung QD-OLED was as much as 15 to 20 degrees higher on average, making the QD-OLED much hotter. So not only does that, I think, add to the heat in the room, but also can potentially damage your panel permanently with burn-in. Something that's plagued older OLED panels, not just monitors. Essentially what it means when you have a static image displayed on a screen, it can kind of get burnt in, almost like ghosting effect. You'll sort of still see it there. When it comes to monitors, it can still be an issue. So I looked at people much smarter than me. They've done much more testing. Ratings.com is a pretty reliable source. They've been doing a really unique test on OLED technology burn-in. They've actually been testing these on 100 different TVs. So they found that WOLED does experience burn-in with extreme use cases. The worst of them was, surprisingly, actually QD-OLED. So the issue was so severe actually that Ratings.com added QD-OLED and WOLED monitors as extended testing. It's too early to tell the results of how these monitors are going to go long term. The results aren't looking great for QD-OLED panels in general. And again, this is probably a small fear. So my TV at home, I picked a LG G2 that is a WOLED technology. It was my first OLED TV that I had bought and owned, and when I spent that much money for a TV, burden is still something that was very much in my mind. It's probably overblown in my head, but I am sort of aware of trying to prevent it. Now I don't think you're gonna have burn-in with QD-OLED, but if either of these sort of were to have an option where burn-in would happen, it seems like it would be more likely on a QD-OLED panel. And to be fair, in these tests, the QD-OLED panels that did get burn-in is under the most extreme use case here. So Ratings.com is doing the absolute sort of most when it comes to stress testing these panels. A general assumption, if I'm just guessing, why QD-OLED are performing worse than WOLED with burn-in comes down to the diode array. This is a little bit more technical, but since WOLED has a dedicated white light diode and the other 3 RGB diodes in the array don't need to push a crazy amount of brightness to produce those bright whites. This helps reduce, I think, the overall heat introduced to the diodes and panel, causing less permanent burn-in. So QD-OLED, on the other hand, doesn't have that dedicated white light diode, so the RGB diodes sort of all need to push a ton of brightness to create white light. So this of course translates to a lot more heat being introduced, making it harder for each diode to refresh itself, kind of resulting in what I'm assuming is a higher rate of potential burn-in. I do worry less about burn-in with the TV. You have to have a much larger surface area and more room for heat management. And when you shrink that tech down to really thin monitors, I'm a bit more cautious of potential long-term burn on something like a gaming monitor where things typically stay stagnant on the screen for long periods of time. So I got like real into the weeds in research, testing burn-in and that kind of stuff. I don't think you're gonna have any burn issues at all with QD-OLED, but if you keep things static on the screen for a really long time, you at least have more potential for it to happen. But again, with pixel shift technology and that kind of stuff, I don't think it's going to be a giant issue either way. So in all fairness, WOLED also, according to Rettinger.com's testing, also can have burn-in, but it does tend to go more towards the ghosting side than burn-in, which can actually be fixed over time. Ultimately though, it's not like ideal, but at least it's not permanent. That's a big thanks to that dedicated white diode that's in there. And that goes a long way in helping those refresh those diodes, so there's far less image retention, to the point where I personally probably wouldn't worry about it all that much. On a more positive note, it is the golden age for OLED technology. OLED TVs, OLED monitors, OLED on handhelds, and I think OLED is still the best display technology going. Whether you want to go the more tested WOLED, you want to go for the brighter QD-OLED, whichever way you go, you're going to get an incredible display. And now you've got choice. Do you want matte display? Do you want glossy? Do you want a higher aspect ratio? Do you want more curve? You can pick the right monitor for you and get an incredibly immersive experience with really good technology. I think that's awesome. So for me, and I saw it with my choice for getting the LG G2, I'm gonna go on the OLED side. I like technology's been tested. I still have like burned in my head. I like the matte display on it. For my workflow, it's worked out better. But there's a beauty of choice now. You can pick the one that is right for you. If you want to learn more about either monitor, I'll put a link to them down below. I'll also link all the Rettingers.com stuff I talked about in case you want to read up on it on your own.